We can start anytime. So you're welcome to keep the banter going for a little bit or to start things off. Either way is fine with me. But this is Sarah and Joey. You teach at Red River High School, and you are both teaching high school. I already said that. And yeah, you've been teaching partners for a long time. How long have you two been teaching partners?
6 years.
Yeah, because we both got hired for basically the same position the same year. I had been teaching the year prior doing biology, but then switched over to physical science instead.
Yeah, and I was in a different school district before that, but then, yeah, we started that same year with the same kind of class load and had a common prep the next year. And that's when we really started working a lot together on basically everything that we do.
Yeah, it's as we put it, we are the dream team. So
What I can do, and actually I think what a lot of what we did as teachers translated well to this whole distance learning thing. So we weren't having to scramble quite so much to maintain some semblance of normalcy for our kids. So I can flip to the screen sharing thing, and we can kind of talk about, unless Joey, do you want to just, like, I have it open on a separate tab. Do we just kind of want to talk through the points? Because the PowerPoint doesn't really look that amazing.
Yeah, we'll just talk through stuff. That's fine.
Okay.
No big deal.
Okay, well, and then we just kind of introduced ourselves a little bit. Like we said before, I mean, both of us are within kind of our first 10-ish years of teaching. I've taught at 2 different school districts. One was a really small one up in the northern corner of Minnesota, or of North Dakota. And then both of us are involved in some extracurriculars. I do some coaching of cross country and then some officiating for track meets. And then Joey, what do you do?
So I teach physical science, just like Sarah does, but I also have geology and I teach a robotics class. As far as my extracurricular goes, they're not true extracurriculars. I coach a robotics team through Vex Robotics, and I do Science Olympiad. This is our second year doing Science Olympiad, but it's taken off really good, and it's all been awesome so far until COVID. So.
Yes, COVID definitely threw a wrench in both of our extracurricular things. Obviously, the track season did not happen since that is a spring sport. And then Joey's robotics, the world championships were canceled, which was a big bummer because if you want to talk about your kind of leading team that has been with you since they were freshmen.
Yeah, so I had I've been coaching for 4 years. So that very first year I had a group of freshmen that joined up on the team. And they kind of stayed a group for 4 years, and this was their 4th year as seniors together, competing. So they made what they called a super team. So they're a little bit bigger than normal, but they were also doing things way beyond normal. And I think we went to 7 or 8 tournaments with that team and other teams, and they won every single one of those tournaments. They won skills at every single one of those tournaments, and they won the highest judged award at every single one of those tournaments. So they were pretty pumped to go to the World Championship this year, and that didn't happen. So yeah, thus is life.
But as so I feel like we were fairly lucky in terms of, I don't know if you can consider any of this lucky, in that our district did not try and push distance learning immediately. Like the school was let out on a Friday, like for a normal weekend, and then we were supposed to go back to school for a shortened week that following week before our spring break. And then instead, schools were all closed, but teachers came in for those 3 days to kind of prep and put a plan together for what distance learning could look like. So we were actually given time to think about how we would do all of this. And as a science department and as specifically physical science teachers, we were allotted time then within the school day to meet with each other and kind of figure out like what are essential things that kids should learn or need to learn, what are platforms people are going to use, what are platforms people already know how to use and could be helpful to each other on. So I feel like our district set us up really well to have success. And then some of the things that Joey and I had already used also helped a little bit. So we can start kind of talking about what has worked really well for us. I know both Joey and I use Google Classroom regularly in our normal class for like our platforms essentially. So all of our materials are posted into Google Classroom already. I like Google Classroom just because it's pretty user friendly and it organizes things. I don't know, Joey, if you want to mention something specific that you really like about Google Classroom.
I mean, I guess I think of myself as a pretty tech heavy or tech orientated person. So I'm pretty comfortable with all that. So I really liked Google Classroom just because I could set all sorts of different things. I could schedule things ahead of time. So like I've got 3 kids in my house, which means my house is crazy 24/7. And so that way I could, you know, when I did have a couple hour break here and there, I could do whatever I needed, come up with whatever I needed, and get all that posted and done ahead of time so that, you know, the assignment for Monday morning was actually ready on Thursday or whatever it was. So I didn't have to worry about that as I'm getting kids up for the morning and getting them breakfast and doing all of that. So that was really nice with Google Classroom.
And I think I like Google Classroom. You can have it set as a teacher or as a student about, to the amount of notifications that you wish to have too. So if you didn't want all of the emails, you could not have all the emails. If you wanted all the emails, you could have them. So it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. You can kind of customize what you see in Classroom to what works for you.
Yeah, ditto. I think I have all my notifications actually turned off. And I think that's from just using Classroom previously. So I had all that turned off, whereas my wife, who is also a teacher at our school, didn't. And so she would get bombarded by emails all day and all night.
And I think I like that Google Classroom allows a little bit of communication within the platform itself too. Like you can private comment to a kid. So instead of having to shoot them a separate email with feedback on the assignment, you can like include that feedback without actually typing on their assignment, or especially if it's not an assignment they actually typed on, if it was something else, but you can send them individual feedback. Or there is like the classroom comment. So if a kid had a generalized question, they could ask it on to the actual class. Or there were some side conversations that happened on Google Classroom about projects or whatever. So it is kind of nice that you can do communication to students just through that platform too.
Yeah. I know we both used Zoom in our class, not necessarily for much synchronous learning, but mostly asynchronous, whether it's having some office hours for students to pop in and talk, or if it was, hey, I would like to meet and talk about this assignment for a little while. We would use Zoom for that. Part of that kind of just stems from we used Zoom first, and so we were both kind of familiar with that versus like Google Meet. And we had a couple meetings with our department on Google Meet, and connection wise and quality wise, it just wasn't very good. So that kind of helped make that an easy decision for us to go with Zoom rather than Google Meet.
Yeah, I can't really say one way or another if like one is better per se than the other, because I was just comfortable with Zoom first and it seemed like a reasonable transition. I don't know, it wasn't too hard to figure out how to schedule Zooms. I'm sure Google Meet is probably the exact same. And now I noticed that Classroom has right from the class homepage, you can schedule Google Meets. So I'm sure that's a nice function. I just haven't played with it.
Yeah.
Joey did mention that both he and I did the majority of asynchronous learning, and that was simply to the kind of ease students where we understand that not everyone is going to be able to make a live teaching session. So when we did our Zooms or whatever platform people were using, we primarily used that for like extra discussions, or I would work through practice problems or examples with kids that did come. So they kind of knew that you can come to that and ask your specific questions, and I will then walk you through extra things because all of the teaching material would have been pre-recorded already using another platform that we talk about later. And that would have been posted into Google Classroom. So they would have already had access to like the teaching part before they would come to a Zoom.
Yeah, and honestly, that's kind of spillover from our regular classroom.
Yeah, it really is.
Both of us don't really do late work, if you will. We're not like, oh, this was 3 days late. This is such and such. We didn't do that anyways. So having kind of an asynchronous platform for us in our teaching worked out really, really well, because that's what the kids already knew. What else do we do?
I think both Joey and I frequently use ck12.org, and that was more of the resources that we have in our classrooms are pretty dated, and then so they would be used pretty sparingly. But then CK12 is a really nice free platform that allows, it does have some textbook style material. It has like practice questions, it has extra activities or extra videos, all contained within the same like platform. It's just kind of different menus within that screen. So I use that year long. And so again, my kids were pretty used to going to those resources for extra support in addition to the regular class material.
Yeah. The last kind of platform that I guess I'll mention that I used, I teach a robotics class, and that was kind of hard to get transitioned into online because I don't have robots to send to kids and let them use. So I had to kind of transition the class to more of a CAD or computer-aided design. And so I used Onshape. We had used Autodesk Inventor previously, which is a really nice piece of software, but it's really, really resource intensive. So these kids have Chromebooks or tablets at home that they're using. And so I needed something that would work well with that. And so I used Onshape, and it worked out fantastic. Students could work on it. I mean, I had one kid who's like, yeah, I could just sit at home on my phone and do these really complex designs and assemblies and put stuff together without having to boot up a big desktop or do things like that. So it was really nice for them. And it was nice for me that they could just send me a link and I can see everything that they've done and critique it and do whatever I needed to do with it. So that was pretty good.
When we did transition to the distance learning, both Joey and I use like a leveled grading system where things that are of higher rigor or of higher orders of thinking, we would typically be like on a quiz or something would be written as like more of an essay question where they would not only answer the question, but then they'd have an explanation. And so that was something that we really struggled with. Well, how do we, what's the best way that we can maybe gauge whether a kid actually understands this material and are explaining it, that they understand this standard, or they just Googled it and did a really great job of faking that they actually know it. So that was where Flipgrid played that role for me, where students would record a video of themselves explaining the answer to a question, and you could just kind of tell by body language or mannerisms or things that they did in their little video as to whether, yes, they actually understood it versus clearly they copied something from Google. They're just reading it from a notebook page. They have no idea what they're talking about. And that allowed, I could then send them a message saying, with feedback of, you know, it seemed like you Googled this answer. Please let me know if, and you could just kind of create that conversation. So I think Flipgrid did allow somewhat of a visual of whether they seemed like they knew what they were talking about, and that when I did communicate with kids, they're usually pretty honest. If you just say, you know, this is what it seems like you did, they would reply back to me like, yes, I did just Google it. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just tried to get the right answer.
Yeah, ran into a lot of the Googled answers, and it was hilariously easy to tell when that was the case versus something that they actually developed and they actually understood and they were actually answering on their own.
So I did like Flipgrid in that regard. It gave students a little bit of, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here, but it gave them a little bit of authenticity also. Like, I should know what I'm talking about because I'm recording a video of myself talking about it that my teacher's gonna view. And actually Flipgrid was nice too, that you could set it where it's designed, the default is that everyone can view all the videos that are turned in. But obviously if they're doing this for like a test answer, you wouldn't want that. So you can change it so that only the teacher can view the videos. So that was a nice, easy feature also.
What do we got next?
Screencastify.
Screencastify. I found myself using Screencast-O-Matic a bit more. Not that I needed the 15 minutes. Okay, so back up. So you have Screencastify and Screencast-O-Matic. Screencastify is the Chrome extension that gives you like a 5-minute video of what's ever on your screen or your webcam or whatever it is. And Screencast-O-Matic is the website, gives you about 15 minutes to use instead. I guess I use Screencast-O-Matic more, mostly because I would find that I would end up needing like 6 minutes or 7 minutes. I'd need just a little bit more than that 5, and I didn't want two videos that I was going to have to stitch together in the end. So I ended up using the Screencast-O-Matic instead, and I just was able to export the videos and put those in my Google pretty easily. I didn't have to go to YouTube or anything of that nature. So that was pretty nice for me.
And I did use the Screencastify. Sometimes the 5 minutes was a little crunchy. I would get that 30-second warning and realize that I needed to hustle through those last 30 seconds. But I think it just worked well in the way that I had kind of organized their information, where I would usually do kind of a teaching video of the content that they were theoretically doing at that day. So I'd have like 2 videos a week, because we kind of did an every other day schedule with our class periods. And in those 5 minutes, was able to kind of hit those highlights of what you would actually teach in a class. Because typically I don't lecture for the entire class period. Actually, I never lecture. But what you end up teaching kids is like the same concepts that they routinely struggle with year in and year out. So I was able to, take those, talk specifically to those in those videos. And then I liked the Screencastify that it went right into Google Drive. So then I had all that just already into my Google Drive and could put it right into Google Classroom.
Yeah, we both pretty much do a lot of whiteboard work, whether it's practice problems or whatever it happens to be, asking questions, getting that instant response. And so that would chew up or eat a lot of our time in the day. And once you unfortunately cut that out and you're left with, well, what's just the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to get across here? Yeah, it cuts down a 50-minute class period to 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. So had a pretty big effect on that.
Yeah, the next thing talked about free resources, and I think especially when this whole thing first started, we were getting emails from our tech people or our science district curriculum person on here's this resource, here's this resource, here's this resource, and it was very easy to just like, oh my goodness, how am I going to incorporate any of these, all of these? What should I do? But I think when we met as physical science teachers, we just at that moment talked about things that we were already using, things like the CK12 that we had lots of experience with. We knew they were decent and useful and free resources, and then people just kind of chimed in for other things, but I don't know, I didn't really have time to explore all of the free things, so there are probably other ones that are great out there, but I think, I don't know, like any tech thing, there's going to be a lot of them, and you just kind of find what works for you and you just go with it. And
yeah, I remember getting probably 4 to 5 emails a day from different platforms, and I'm like, I don't ever remember signing up for you, but okay. And just getting bombarded with emails, and then you'd like get an email from a company, and then our tech person would forward that email to all of us as well, and then our science curriculum person would also forward that email to us, so we'd get the same thing 3 times a day from certain companies and things like that. And that was just a nightmare. I remember even a couple of our department meetings, people would be like, well, has anybody tried this? How does this work? How about this one? And it's just like, go with what works for you. Pick something, stick with it. It's going to be best for you, and it's going to be best for your students that way. You don't want the hassle of, let's learn a whole new program that we've never used before on top of it. 1, maybe 2 of those, not so bad. But you don't want to do that every single week with every single lesson.
Right. And the tough time, or the hard thing, is when you're trying to what it seems like throw an entire quarter together in days as you're exploring these resources. So there probably are really great online resources out there. And it just takes a little exploring, maybe over a summertime. Like now you've been exposed to all these different resources. Maybe you decide this was one that seemed like it was okay. Now I have time to maybe actually look into it and decide if it's going to be a good resource or if it's something that I would only use sparingly.
Yeah, we pretty much had to go from, a 45-day quarter down to, I think we ended up with about 15 teaching days that made up quarter four for us. 2 classes a week for a month and a half gives you something like that. And we had to squish things down, but yet not overload kids. And that was the biggest thing we always heard in staff meetings or from friends of ours, that, my kid has 6 days of work a week. And it's like, but that's not supposed to be the way it is. It's supposed to be 2 in our case. And so there's a lot of compression there with material and cutting and figuring out exactly what is the essential standards, what is the things that need to be covered to make this work.
I know for us, so our physical science class is broken into the 2 semesters where we do physics in the fall and then chemistry in the spring. So that kind of leads us into virtual labs, actually. So chemistry labs, there are not a ton available virtually. So what we sort of ended up doing was taking our original labs and then finding videos. I know some of our chem teachers actually made videos in their classrooms of themselves doing the actual experiment so that kids could kind of see what was happening. My student teacher and I were able to find videos where the experiments would have been shown. So I know that online chemistry labs are usually pretty hard to come by, but in the fall, Joey and I use the Inkits for the physics labs pretty frequently. I think we use like 3 or 4 of them throughout the course of that fall. And our reasons, especially, so for physics, we like the Inkits labs, especially for more difficult concepts to visualize, things like gravity or collisions or waves, where those are really tough to visualize in a small classroom setting where you might not have the right tools to measure things or enough space to actually perform something that is meaningful, or you're trying to track hundreds of seconds, which is like impossible, or collisions where there's so many other variables going on that kids really struggle to see what's actually happening in those things if they do the lab within a classroom. But through Inkits, you could do simulations outside of Earth's gravity, or they can remove things like friction and all of those for the collisions, so kids could actually see the concepts happening in a lab situation that they wouldn't be able to in a classroom.
Yeah, the other place where kind of the online labs came into play is during this kind of team teaching that Sarah and I do. We were looking at, well, how do we kind of fix this whole lab situation from a cookbook into a kind of a free-form recipe, if you will. And Inkits really helped us lay the groundwork with our students, and this was 4 or 5 years ago that we started using Inkits. That really helped us change that part of our teaching into something that was going to work. So it taught those initial concepts that these students had never had before, because they've just been follow the directions, answer these 2 questions, done, have a nice day. And Inkits helped us lay the groundwork with those kids to introduce more of that free form into our own classrooms. And that was,
go ahead.
That's been great. We honestly probably couldn't have done the big changes we wanted without the help from Inkits.
Right. So to specifically talk why Inkits, the beginning of each Inkits lab is literally this question of, if you are going to manipulate this variable, how is that going to affect the other variable? And then they design this experiment where they choose the different variables and then see how the overarching variable is then affected. They collect data and then they have to analyze that data and then actually write about it, which was what we wanted to do. We wanted to have more of a generalized lab experience where they would kind of choose, under that grand question of the content that they were looking at, like forces. So they would kind of have multiple opportunities to design different experiments on how that variable affects how things move, or acceleration or something like that. And Inkits helped start that thought process for kids. So oftentimes they would do the Inkets lab, where they would have to choose specific variables, but then they would do a real life lab, and then they would get to choose like a different variable that they didn't choose during the Inkets, or they would try and prove that in real life the same thing is seen as it was in the virtual simulation. And then from a teaching standpoint, I liked Inkets. I really liked the ink blotter because it helped me keep track of kids that just kind of fly under the radar, where they're struggling, but every time you walk by them, they're like, no, I'm fine. And unless you can say, hey, I see that you are struggling with this, or I see that this is kind of, not going well, or whatever it is. But ink blotter breaks it down into the different like exact sections of the lab. And so you can see, hey, I know, I can see that you're struggling to make a hypothesis. And then they're like, oh, yep, I actually am. And then you can have that one-on-one conversation rather than the generalized statement you throw out to the class of, how is everybody doing? And of course, everyone says, fine. So I liked ink blotter because it allowed me to catch those kids that are struggling but don't want to say anything.
Yeah, it's almost like a gotcha moment of, no, you're not fine, actually. Let me help you out. I'm trying to think if we had blotter when we first started using Inkets or not.
I don't think that we did. I think.
Yeah, I don't think you did. You were one of the first teachers to pilot it.
Yeah, so I remember those first couple labs without blotter, and it just became educated guessing as you looked at the color of their screen to figure out, well, which part are they on exactly? Oh, they've been on that color for a while. Let me go help this kid. So
right, or you would find out after the fact that, oh gosh, they had no idea what they're doing, but now they're already in their next class period, and I'm gonna have to try and remember to catch them tomorrow, and
yeah,
that can be a little bit tricky sometimes too.
or go back in and look at the report, and they've done 1 of 4 sections, and you're like, oh shoot, I didn't catch that kid. Okay, I gotta go.
Right.
Gotta talk to him tomorrow.
But the ink blotter even helped kids rationalize what they were doing also. So sometimes ink blotter would tell me that they're struggling, and so I'd go talk to them, and they're like, actually, I'm not struggling. I just clicked the wrong thing, but I can't go back and change it. So I know what I'm doing, and I'll like account for it when I, talk about my data. So yes, I'm not actually struggling. This is what I did.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I love about what you two have done is taking the structure and using it for your labs. Like, so your labs, like your hands-on labs are scaffolded. And so like we've done some research with your labs to show how using Inkets helps students with their hands-on labs. But I felt like I just wanted to share the hands-on labs you two are doing with students. I just wanted to share them with all of the teachers, like everybody, because they provide scaffolding that students really need.
You certainly can. I mean, those are not like trademark labs, so they're just Google documents. Just make a copy and share them.
Yep.
I love the fact that you really gave students choices, and so students were able to do true inquiry, but in a reasonable space, right? Not like, hey, mix whatever you want. Like, I'm sure it'll be fine.
And the chemistry, that's obviously something that, yes, chemistry can't just be a free-for-all. If you're going to explore the reactivity of a specific group of elements, you can't just go all willy-nilly. But the structure, like the questions that were, or the way that the lab report was still set up was very much like, you don't have a specific answer to this, but what did the data kind of show you about this trend, or about, you still had to talk about it, even though you were still like following a set of directions of measuring things to mix them, etc.
Yeah, and the way we set it up was, kids who maybe struggled a little bit more had created a much simpler exploration of the concept, whereas a kid who's already like, well, I already know that this does it, and this affects it, and this does it, well, then our labs are structured that they're going to have to look outside of those areas and pick out something that truly is kind of an upper level concept or connection to the topic at hand.
Yeah, I think it's looking at your labs that made me realize that at some point we need to develop the ability to assess a student's identification of their dependent variable in data collection, right? Because it was when looking at your hands-on labs that I saw how often students correctly identify their independent variable and their dependent variable in hypothesizing, because they'd had lots of practice by that point. But then when it came to looking at their data, then they like would just go like off left field. And you're like, what, where did they get this dependent? Like, how did they change what they're measuring? Like in the middle of measuring.
Yep.
Right.
And I love that. And then the other thing that I've really enjoyed working with the two of you is, and I think you kind of touched on this a bit before, but asking those questions that makes students think about something at a deeper level, and it isn't something that they can Google. So putting them into a different scenario that isn't an actual scenario. So they can't Google it, but it makes them think about the scientific reasoning at a deeper, just different science concepts at a deeper level. And
to maybe help clarify, it's what we call the apply the science part of the lab, where the whole lab is obviously geared towards some standard typically, or some like specific concept that they are trying to visualize. And then the apply the science is either like a real world example or kind of like a thought problem where they need to take the concepts that they've learned in class and that lab and then apply it to a situation or explain a phenomenon that actually does occur in real life, why it occurs based on that concept that they just did in the lab and had been learning about in class.
Yeah, it's really great because the two of you in saying these things, like we'll do some beta testing here. In fact, if anyone has students who would be at a, let's just say 9th grade physical science level, even if you just have some volunteers during the month of June, whether that's even like, if we can get 6 kids that can hop onto a Zoom call and do a lab, or 8 kids or whatever, we'll take anything at this point to finish out our research for the year. But because of comments from Sarah and Joey, and because of comments from your students, we are rolling out a new introduction to these, and we're doing beta testing with this in June. And so students will get more of a scenario rather than just hopping into a lab. It's actually,
face.
I know, it's set up like, I wish you could see my face, but there's something weird about Zoom. It says that you, Sarah, turned off my ability to have a camera, which obviously you didn't.
I know, and I can't figure out how to do it.
I know. Like, Sarah doesn't want everybody to see my excited face. That's okay. It's kind of like a comic book, like students talking and like, what about this? What if we did this? Well, let's experiment with that. And so we're putting students more in a scenario and having them think in terms of that situation before they start into the lab, and then writing up at the end about that scenario that they were just in. And so trying to give it a place in a time. And so I really appreciate that feedback. So it's beta testing in June, and we're looking for teachers and bored guinea pig students who are willing to do some beta testing. Because if we get beta testing, then we can allow people to just use it in the fall. So very, very exciting. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask your questions. I can see the chat. I could see Q&A. If anyone had any questions to ask Sarah or Joey, unless I didn't mean to cut you off. So if you had something else.
I did not.
Okay, good. Hey, I read the situation. Yay for me. That's awesome. And I'm a little bit jealous that you're wearing short sleeves right now, because we had our AC go out during that 80-degree day. And I think it was like, it was us and like a third of everyone else in the Portland area. And so we called that day and we booked with them. And it has been a week and a half, and we still we have no heat. We have no AC. Our thermostat was fried in the process. And so we've been like a week and a half with no heat or AC or anything. So,
oh man,
Yeah. Yeah. We're lucky to be in Oregon, right? In North Dakota, I think we just would have like packed up and gone somewhere else. But in Oregon, it's like, okay, well, it's 52 degrees outside, so it's 61 in my house. It's okay. It's all good. We don't seem to have any questions. Really, you guys? Anybody, any questions, anything? How does Joey get his goatee to look so nice? We can't even see you. Do you currently have a crazy beard going on and long hair?
No, oh gosh. In college, I was crazy beard and crazy hair guy. And then when I became a teacher, I'm like, oh shoot, I got to be like an adult now. So I dropped the whole, I still have my goatee, but I dropped the whole beard thing, and I cut my hair quite often. So.
Yeah. Is your wife cutting it right now?
Oh, she's always cut it. I think since we've been married, she's always cut it.
Yeah.
So we've saved many hundreds of dollars that way.
Yeah. I think after this experience, we might go that way too, because I've had lots of experience now cutting my husband's hair and the two boys. So
nice.
Every 3 weeks or so, I just do all three of them. And so.
Yeah, I've got three boys.
I'm very jealous.
I've got three boys. So we pick a day, and then all four of us get haircuts and look identical to each other for a day.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. The funniest thing is that my son is really missing his teacher, and his teacher shaves his head. So when we very first did this, he was like, Mom, I want you to shave my head, like full on, like shave my head. And so I was like, you know what? We all miss our teachers in different ways. Let's go with it. So I really appreciate both of you being here. Hopefully none of your students are connecting with you by shaving their heads.
I have gotten a few of them to join cross country, but other than
that. Are you like doing online mapping, like online recording of miles or anything like that?
I know for the track team, they were kind of filling in their things like through a Google spreadsheet. We are going to be able to, so phase 2 opens for North Dakota on June 1st. So we'll be able to gather in small groups to run together. So we'll be able to start our summer running program almost under normal conditions.
Wow, that's great. As long as it's not insanely humid and hot, because those are not good running conditions for me.
Yeah. I think our season typically, so August is like 90. And then last year, our conference meet in the middle of October, there was 6 inches of snow on the ground.
So Mike is actually in Montana. And unless he's like Sarah and hopped on a plane to visit somebody in a warmer location. Mike has the question, how do you share Inget's work and provide feedback with students? So when students are done with the lab, what do you have? Do you have students like print a PDF and upload it somewhere, or they're just done and that's like, how do you share feedback with students? What's your process like?
I can go first. For me, I don't actually grade their Inkets. My Inkets purpose is more of the exploration part, and then getting the feel for how they work with variables, how they set up experiments, and how they then like communicate their data and what they found out. So what I do is I just walk the whole time. I'll put the ink blotter on my little Chromebook, and I will just walk around and constantly be checking in with kids, seeing how they're doing. And for the most part, I feel like I have a good finger on what my kids are struggling with or doing well as I do that. And because we do several Inkets labs, I can kind of in my brain remember which kids really struggled. So I will immediately go to them on that next session of Inkets labs and kind of get them started off on a good foot right away. So I don't necessarily provide them feedback as far as a grade goes. I provide feedback in the moment, or if there's like huge issues, I'll write myself a note and then catch that kid the next day to talk about it.
And I mean, we're very similar. So her answer kind of works for me. One of my teacher goals this year was to have kids discuss their work and their hypotheses and their conclusions that they're drawing from things in more of a public setting and defending them. So we've started to do some fishbowl discussions. And I kind of started that after, as we got into more second semester, which was less INKITS labs that we did. But I'd like to even do just a quick 15-minute fishbowl activity or something like that about the INKITS lab itself, because I don't do a grade for it either. It's more the concepts and the ideas to get them started and rolling and thinking about it. And so I'd like to do more of those discussion type things to go along with the INKITS lab in general.
I never graded, just like took the lab grades straight across. I gave students the opportunity to expand upon and improve, because I feel like the scoring is a bit too harsh. I like, because you can be proficient and have a 71, and like to me a 71 is not a proficient student, so that would like be heartbreaking for some students to be proficient and yet get a 71. So yeah. Are there any other questions? Aaron, Jen, Mike, did you have any more? Anybody want Sarah to show us what blue sky looks like? This is what it's like when the ground is not covered in snow and or super cloudy and rainy. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. And this has been recorded, so I'll be sharing a copy of the video here in a little bit. And if you have any further questions, Sarah, Joey, do you mind if I forward anything like that to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yep, go for it.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. And if anyone would like to find some guinea pig students to pilot the new introductions, etc., please let me know. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
You too.
Thank you.